Hello, this is Clive de Carl welcoming you to another edition of the Health Revolution. Today I'm particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Russell Jaffe, and I found your work, Dr. Jaffe, to be just exceptionally interesting, just fantastic. So thank you very much for joining me.
A pleasure and a privilege to share the information.
Well, that's brilliant. Um, Today I was hoping we could talk primarily about how to safely detox.
Right.
Because it seems clear to me, and I'm sure to you, that without exception, everybody on this planet, I think, has got a toxic load going on, no matter how wonderfully they've been eating, just from the fact of breathing and so on.
Exactly right. And if I could throw in a little metaphor or a little bit of an anecdote, in the late 1970s, when I was known as a futurist before I got interested in the here and now, but in the late 1970s, a company called Royal Dutch Shell was interested in people like me and Amy Levins and Paul Hawken and so forth. And the point I'm going to make is, to try and be very succinct, in the 1970s, Royal Dutch Shell knew that you could never do a controlled experiment because no place on the planet was free of substantial, man-made, man-introduced toxic burdens. There's 5 categories of them. They all use up the essential nutrients, the antioxidants, the minerals, the cofactors that we must take in. We cannot make them in our body. That's why they're called essential. And yes, the 21st century is the most challenging time to be alive. You also have more opportunity because of communication and all that goes with that. But as the Chinese metaphor says, be wary of living in interesting times, because interesting times carry extra challenge. And so in the 19th century, the body detoxified itself naturally, and we relied on nature, nurture, and wholeness. People like me want to bring us back to nature, nurture, and wholeness, but in the 21st century, you must intensively take in protective antitoxin nutrients because, as you did say correctly, between 100 and 100,000 times more, depending on which toxin we're talking about. And you don't get exempt by living on the top of a mountain because it's in the water, air, soil, food. Here we are. And what are we going to do about it? And that is the question, because detoxification in the 21st century is a much more intensive and much more important process than it's ever been. But our bodies are made to detoxify. So the good news is our bodies are made to detoxify. We have to provide what we as individuals, call biochemical individuality, what we need. And then we should monitor. You know the old saying about trust but verify? Well, trust in nature, nurture, and wholeness. However, verify using predictive biomarkers interpreted to their best outcome goal value.
For people at this point who are asking what is a predictive biomarker, perhaps we should just briefly go there.
Yes. A biomarker is something that measures something in biology, a biomarker. A predictive biomarker looks ahead. And the specific 8 predictive biomarkers that I'm alluding to, that I want to talk about, are critical in order to assess how effective your detoxification is. They cover what is called epigenetics. These are not genomic genetic tests. These are functional, predictive, primary, proactive prevention tests. And what they do is look 10 or more years ahead. And what's your chance of having a cardiovascular event or a cancer? All-cause morbidity mortality is the technical term. So these predictive biomarkers, and we looked at 150,000 tests and came down to 8. And each one is individually validated on every population, every socioeconomic group, every ethnic group, every geography. And if you use them the way I recommend, based on their best outcome goal value, you can look at your probability of 10 plus year survival. Do you have a 99% chance of living 10 or more years? If you're at your healthiest, predictive goal value, you will. Or do you have a 9% chance of living a decade? Big difference. So these 8 tests are predictive, they're biomarkers, they're ready for prime time. We're just repurposing them using high precision analytics, so there's little variance on the value. You can trust the value more. And it does cover all of lifestyle, all of the things you can influence with your habits of daily living.
So it's so interesting because, I mean, a lot of people are going to feel, on the one hand, quite enlivened with the idea that they've got a chance of getting an early warning sign. Other people are going to be frightened out of their wits by
well, yes, and I come in peace. The good news is that you can save your life. The other news is that if you wait for someone else to save your life, say by eating a better diet and being nice and being mindful and getting some restorative sleep, all of these things are important. But we as individuals can determine to a very large extent the quality and duration of our life. When I was at the National Institutes of Health, which is like your MRC, I was one of many people who looked at the question of how much of our health is in our hands and how much is determined by the choice of our parents, if you will. 8% is genetic, 92% is choice, 92% is epigenetic, 92% is habits that you have learned, and by the way, there might be better habits out there, and you can relearn them in a matter of weeks. Not minutes, but not decades. So yes, for those who have not heard the message before, the 21st century is a challenging, hazardous time to be alive. And which specific toxins you get exposed to is individual, but that we will get exposed to toxins in substantial amounts compared to our history is a fact. That's not an opinion. There's too much data to confirm that simple reality. So intensive detoxification based on predictive biomarkers, from my point of view, is what any intelligent person would do today to save their own life.
And just roughly speaking, what's the cost of having all these 8 biomarkers tested?
Very fair question. The 8 biomarker cost less than $1,000, including the counseling of what the results mean and what to do over the next 6 months to take the news into action. So less than let me think about this in pounds. I guess it would be 850 pounds.
Yeah, or possibly even less at the moment.
Or maybe less, and now, I want to put in one point about this. Several of these tests are conventional. We would just interpret them differently. So if you are on the register of a licensed physician in the United Kingdom, a number of these tests are routine and can be ordered within the national health system. So it's not that you have to reach into your pocket for all of it. I don't know whether the counseling would be covered or not. I highly recommend that. A health coach to me is really important to provide information, inspiration, and practical tips to take the information, the interpretation, off the page and into the kitchen and into the life of the person.
So to actually start the detoxification process, I mean, I think you'd probably agree that somebody would need to get their elimination pathways clear before they could even really consider actually starting detoxifying.
Yes, sir. And now we're getting into something very important and something worth a bit of discussion. There's an old saying about fools rush in where angels fear to tread. I hear a lot of people very aggressively preaching the message of detox to people who are so, shall I say, ungestoppt, which is an old Yiddish German word for stopped up, which means they have a long transit time. Transit time is the time from consumption to elimination, from the time you eat until you poop. And we recommend 3 or 4 self-assessments that cost just a few pounds each to begin. One of them is the transit time test. You take charcoal capsules, you mark the time. When the black crumbly stuff comes out of your tush, you mark the time. The difference in hours is your transit time. Healthy transit time is 12 to 18 hours. If you have beets at night for dinner, and beets are a very healthy food, in the morning you might see red in the commode. Now, that's a measure of transit, but I don't recommend doing it because when I have beets, in the morning I see the red in the commode, but my first thought is never, oh, I had beets last night. So charcoal to do transit time, measure the urine acid state or pH after rest. Check your hydration. I'm going to show you a demonstration that I'm well hydrated. I don't know if you can see this well, but I've just pinched the skin on the back of the palm of their hand, and when I let it go, it should go flat right away. Yeah. And if it slowly relaxes, drink 8 to 12 ounces of water. Just drink a glass of water and check in a half an hour, and you'll be better hydrated. And the metaphor there is get a carafe, fill it with water, have a glass. Put this in front of you. If the glass is full, drink it. If the glass is empty, fill it. And just keep doing that all day. So yes, we need at least 8 glasses of 8 ounces a day, plus a glass of water for every caffeinated beverage, every artificially sweetened beverage, every adult alcoholic beverage. Alcohol is a mild diuretic, so it stresses the kidneys a little bit. It does other nice things. It can be a source of fuel. It can relax you, lower your blood pressure in moderation, in moderation. So one of our messages is live in harmony with your nature, live in moderation, and again, a metaphor, eat like a peasant and feel like a king or queen. If you eat a rich and processed diet, you will suffer, it will be costly, and you will sacrifice years of quality life. On the other hand, if you eat foods that you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden, and here those biomarker tests come in, because if there's an immune burden we can identify through your lymphocytes, through your white blood cells, the ones that are in circulation and carry the information about your immune defense and repair system. So we will often get back to the specific role of the biomarker test in identifying the toxic burden or the resilience factor. So are you able to process sugar? Are you able to repair? Are you able to move things around in your body? It's called methylation and sulfur metabolism. Sulfur is a very important part of our diet. And there's certain foods that, following the nature, nurture, and wholeness, there are certain foods that we recommend because they're natural detoxifiers, because they're sulfur-rich and other elements. For example, GGOBE, those letters represent garlic, ginger, onions, brassica sprouts, broccoli sprouts, and eggs. GGOBE, garlic, ginger, onions, brassica sprouts, and eggs. These one or more should be a staple in your diet. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of America, said, let foods like garlic, ginger, and onions be staples in your diet, and let foods like meat be condiments. So we have altered, restructured the human diet. We have increased packaging and processing to the point where many companies consider themselves packaged goods companies. It's just that the package happens to have something crisp or extruded or has calories in it, but they don't think of themselves as food companies. And come to my house, you will barely find a package. What you will find is a lot of whole foods. So we have grasses more than grains because they're easier to digest. And we have a biodynamic permaculture food forest in our front yard so that for some of the year, we go out and pick the salad based on what's blossoming that day. And we do have edible flowers. So I have made such a transition, and I enjoy the process of maintaining or restoring my health. And so you raised a very important point. Very often people, I think, are afraid of what they don't yet know, and therefore they hold back on what would save their life. And I do come in peace, because this is doable. This is not something you have to go to the top of a mountain and give up your entire life. In fact, I live a fairly active life, and I often meet people on planes and trains and in hotels and restaurants. And if we get into a conversation, very often they want to know why someone didn't tell them this before. And I don't know why someone didn't tell them this before, but I know how long it took me to glean this information. When I was skeptical, I went really all over the world as best I could, and I found some common themes. But I do understand why people are hesitant. I do understand why sometimes people rush in to detoxify, feel worse on their way to feeling better, and maybe put themselves at some risk, potential risk. So I am in favor of nature, nurture, and wholeness, which means you enhance detoxification based on habits of daily living, based on what you eat, drink, think, and do. It's a combination of all. And you do it as a team approach. You do it as a symphony. You do it as a garden. I think in medicine, we have too many military metaphors and too many mechanical metaphors. The human body it has physical properties, of course, but it's much more. It's alive, it's electromagnetic, it's pulsing. Every time you move, little compression on the collagen and elastin fibers in your hands or feet send messages to your brain about where you are and what's coming. So the human body, the more you get into it, it's simply elegant, and it's elegantly simple, although it helps to be cross-trained in a half a dozen different scientific disciplines to understand it and be able to explain it. And I think my privilege, if I do understand it, I can explain it. And if I can't explain it clearly, it's because I don't understand it. So that's where I am.
It seems to me that doctors in general have lost the notion that the body is a self-repairing mechanism, and that with the right minerals and vitamins and amino acids and essential fats and so on in, and water and sunshine and the toxins out, that we shouldn't be ill full stop at all.
Well, you're 100% correct, and I'm old enough to remember when there were 2 points of view: the physiology point of view, the nature, nurture, and wholeness point of view, and the pharmaceutical point of view. Today, there is so much to be learned about pharmacology that essentially that has taken over the medical curriculum. In 8,000 hours of training, I had 4 hours on nutrition and lifestyle. And one of those was canceled because we had an exam coming up. So doctors, both in Europe and in the United States, do not generally learn much about what I'm communicating. I didn't learn it from NIH. I learned it, as I said, I went as a skeptic, but I went and found people who were willing to show me how little I knew about life. I knew a lot about pathology. I was a doubly board certified pathologist, clinical pathologist, an internist, a physician, a biochemist. That I was. But in terms of functional understanding of how to save my own life, or my parents' life, or my children's life, that I had to learn by going and sitting at the feet of people who had wisdom, and they were invariably gracious and willing to share what they knew. And then in most cases, I became their personal physician. And that's a very different relationship than just being the acolyte sitting at their feet.
And so along with the diet to get the heavy metals and the toxins out, if one wanted to go the supplement route, perhaps somebody's had a test and they realize actually they've got something quite serious to deal with,
Right.
Where would one go? Actually, just before you answer that question, when you mentioned taking charcoal as a marker, how many charcoal tablets do you have to take so you can actually visibly see the difference?
Yes. First, folks are welcome to go online, drrusselljaffe.com, PERQ, PERQUE.com, betterlabtestnow.com, all have information about the transit time self-assessment. Or if you just search online for transit time self-assessment, probably you'll see my face and a description. But to answer your question, 6 to 12 charcoal capsules. The company that makes the charcoal is called Requa, R-E-Q-U-A. Whatever brand you buy, they make it all. It's all dioxin-free, of course. It is just what it is. It's charcoal. Now, charcoal is used for the transit time. It is also used to detoxify, but be careful, because if you take charcoal every day, you will bind fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E. You'll bind fat-soluble vitamins and prevent those vitamins from getting in the body. So we use charcoal, but we use it selectively. When I use charcoal, because people have toxins that I want to bind in their gut, I might give it to them twice a week, like Monday and Thursday. And it's part of what I said about intelligent 21st century detoxification, as opposed to, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, we must throw everything at the heavy metals. And heavy metals are abounding, probably 10 to 20 micrograms per day per person. And by the way, what I recommend is biodetoxification first. So before we get to intensive supplementation, we want to have a diet that is as low in toxins and as high in nutrients as possible. So I do recommend organic rather than commercial sources of food, more particularly biodynamic if you have access to that kind of intensive organic, high quality, nutrient dense food. But in terms of getting the toxins out like heavy metals, start with your friend ascorbate. Notice I didn't say vitamin C, because that's mostly synthetic and irritating and a problem. But ascorbate, nature's antioxidant that sets the energy level of the cell. It's called the redox, the oxidation reduction potential. Imagine that there's a healthy low electrical level, and that's what healthy cells have. But when you're susceptible to infection, you're now at a higher level of oxidation, a lower level of antioxidants, and ascorbate basically is maternal. Ascorbate sacrifices herself so that all other antioxidants can be regenerated, conserved, and restored. Very nice of ascorbate to do that. But what that means in the 21st century is that you might and probably do need a lot more ascorbate than you would have needed 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. And how much does an individual need? It's called the C, capital C, cleanse, like the letter C, cleanse. And again, go online and look at C cleanse or C cleanse Jaffe, and it'll come up with instructions of how to do it. You take ascorbate every 15 minutes. If you're healthy, you take a half a teaspoon of powder, put it in water. That's about 1.5 grams. If you're moderately okay, you take a teaspoon, which is 3 grams. And most people who are unwell are better off starting with 6 grams every 15 minutes. Now, 6 grams is 6,000 milligrams. And 6 grams every 15 minutes is 24 grams in an hour. In 2 hours, 48 grams. And most people will cleanse. They will have an evacuation like an enema from within. It is so unique that when you have the experience, you no longer doubt what I'm talking about. That self-assessment, the C cleanse, gives you an index of how much oxidative stress you're under, how much toxic metal you're burdened with at this point in time. And the best news of all is that ascorbate is a mild chelator. Ascorbate wraps around lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, toxic metals, wraps around them and chaperones them out through urine, sweat, and stool. So you're doing several good things for yourself, just by assessing how much ascorbate you need to flush or cleanse. Next, what we already talked about are sulfur-rich foods that bind to toxic metals. The sulfur compounds, these are allosulfides and allopropyl sulfides for the chemists and the listeners. But these sulfur-rich foods, the garlic, ginger, onions, brassica sprouts, and eggs, bind toxic metals, irreversibly bind them, chemically bind them, and then they can be removed in sweat, urine, and stool. So that's two ways of lowering the toxic metals: through lifestyle, by taking in the amounts of ascorbate you need, by taking in the amounts of sulfur-rich foods that you need. And then you were good enough and correctly to say, what about supplements? Well, if you have toxic metals in your body, chances are the magnesium, the forgotten electrolyte magnesium, is probably low. And the chances are that your magnesium value in the serum is in the lower half of the usual range. Dr. Ron Aline, my colleague, has defined that as chronic latent magnesium deficiency. And your listeners are probably more aware of calcium channel blockers. So there's a big category of high blood pressure medicines and other medications called calcium channel blockers. The reason that doctors prescribe calcium channel blockers is because we have a relative excess of calcium, but an absolute deficiency of magnesium. And the problem has been that getting magnesium in has been difficult, and when it gets in, it tends to run out as fast as it comes in. And we have pioneered a novel uptake and chaperone delivery system to enhance magnesium uptake and chaperone the delivery to the cell. And why is magnesium so important? Well, magnesium is nature's calcium channel blocker. Magnesium is the buffer inside the cell that allows the battery to work. The mitochondrial battery can only give energy to the cell when magnesium is there to displace the proton, the acid, that the mitochondria gives along with the ATP. The work molecule is called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. When you have a proton gradient, when you have a healthy cell rich in magnesium, then the battery works well. When the magnesium is deficient in the diet or because of an acid lifestyle that depletes buffers like magnesium, then the battery shuts down. Your get up and go got up and went, and you don't know how to find it anymore. You don't get restorative sleep. You don't want to be active. Why? Because you don't have much endurance, because the battery is shutting down. And then magnesium protects essential fats when they're being transported. So if you want your omega-3 fats like EPA and DHA to be protected while they're in the LDL or HDL transport system, magnesium turns out to be the antioxidant and buffer that protects essential fats in transit. So there's lots of things that magnesium does. And if you look at typical Europeans or Americans, they have a relative excess of calcium, but they have an absolute deficiency of magnesium at the cellular level. And it's a little hard to measure the cellular magnesium. But what's easy to measure is the serum magnesium. And in the past, we used to say, oh, well, you know, the serum is just traffic. It's just what's in the blood at that moment in time. It turns out, carefully looking at the numbers for many, many years, Dr. Aline showed that chronic latent magnesium deficiency is epidemic. It's pervasive in our society, even in younger people and certainly in older people. It's part of why people get high blood pressure. It's part of why people accumulate toxic metals. It's part of why people, quote, age, which means lose function. I want to live as long as possible and die as young functioning as possible based on choices I'm making every day to get the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. And when you have enough magnesium, then there's a channel in the gut that takes up magnesium and calcium. And when you have enough magnesium, it's very finicky and selective, and it keeps the toxic metals out. But it turns out that magnesium and calcium have two charges. They're divalent cations. And all the toxic metals, lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, nickel, are also divalent cations. And so when the body is hungry for magnesium, it will take up toxic metals from the gut. Whereas when the body is healthy and has enough magnesium, then it's very selective in that channel, that uptake pore. And if you have enough fiber, if you have enough ascorbate, if you have enough sulfur, you should bind the toxic metals in the gut before they get in the body. And if they do get in the body, then we have something rather remarkable called metallothionein. And I am a biochemist, and every once in a while I throw in these words, but metallothionein binds toxic metals. It requires magnesium and or zinc, and it is simply the amino acid glycine and cysteine alternating. So it's glycine, cysteine, and there's metallothioneins all over your body, in the urine, in the gut, in the brain, in the eye. There's metallothioneins in healthy people, in people who take in enough sulfur sources in their diet and enough antioxidants and enough buffering minerals. And these people protect themselves from the toxic metals through metallothioneins. And if you do what I'm talking about and then provoke into the urine from the tissues, take something like D-penicillamine, and basically it's like a sponge that goes throughout the body, goes in the cell, out of the cell, in the brain, out of the brain, doesn't redeposit the toxic metal. That's good. But now you can look in the urine at both essential nutritional minerals, and toxic minerals, and you will find that the people who have metallothionein have low burden of toxic metals and high magnesium and zinc and other good minerals. And in contrast, the people who are walking worried and correctly concerned about toxic metals don't realize that their lifestyle has allowed these toxic metals to come in and stay. And what I'm saying is you should block them from coming in, and if they do come in, you should have a healthy metallothionein to get rid of them. So you have ascorbate, you have sulfur-rich foods, you have supplements including magnesium plus choline citrate. The secret is choline citrate. No other form of choline and no other form of citrate. But magnesium taken at the same time as choline citrate forms a little nano droplet. It's called a reverse micelle for the chemist, but a nano droplet that is taken up through neutral pores. So even when the usual uptake of magnesium is blocked, we can get it in through this enhanced uptake and then chaperone the delivery. And of course, everything is active because these are the formulas that I've developed. The choline builds acetylcholine in the brain. It builds cholinergic bile salts so that your bile gets toxins out of the liver and is more fluid. And the choline itself, along with inositol, is a communication molecule at the surface of the cell. And the country tends to be low in choline. So that this enhanced uptake and chaperone delivery is specifically, but also generally, very important.
And would I be right in saying that choline would be in eggs?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Eggs have sulfur. Eggs, to some extent, are the perfect food with the perfect packaging. You know, it's elegantly simple packaging, and then it's completely recycled. The egg, the white part and the yolk are meant to balance each other. And yes, one of the richest sources of choline are eggs, particularly duck and goose eggs, if you have access to them, or quail eggs. And I do prefer the other species eggs or the truly organic free-range chicken eggs. If you ever go to a chicken farm, you would not. No chicken would volunteer for the way commercial chickens are raised, either the egg layers or for the food. And by the way, they use growth enhancers that include arsenic. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. The bird grows faster, a process called hormesis. But you feed them a little bit of a toxin, and they get bigger faster. But then the person who eats that food eats the toxin. I don't think that's a good deal. So be careful. be careful so that you eat the foods you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. That might involve these predictive biomarker tests and LRA tests to find out which foods are preoccupying your immune system so that you're not repairing. So you have inflammation, you have autoimmunity, which have become epidemic in developed societies today. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of autoimmune diseases, from diabetes to multiple sclerosis, eczema, psoriasis, ulcerative colitis, regional enteritis. I could go on and on and on. Then there are the inflammatory conditions. Now, we have done a bunch of what we call rethinking. So when you look more deeply, inflammation is really repair deficit, and autoimmunity is really a loss of tolerance. So we want people to eat the foods they can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. We want those foods to be nutrient dense and rich, and then we want supplements because the 21st century is a challenging time. And when you have full disclosure supplements, when you have functionally correct supplements, that is the amount you need for your biochemical individuality based on predictive biomarker tests and self-assessments that we've been talking about, now you can live well and happy. You can be functioning at a young age, even when your birth certificate says, you're an octogenarian or a nonagenarian. And I have specialized in people who, while they're 90 or 100 years of age chronologically, they function as a 30 or 40-year-old. It is a choice. It is possible. It's not Pollyannish to say that we can renew our body by habits of daily living, or we can let it just kind of slide down the slippery slope slowly, which is what the average person does. I'm interested in the unaverage. I'm interested in the exceptional person, the one who says, I'm going to look the 21st century in the eye and I'm going to survive. And I'm going to thrive, not just survive. I think it is possible. Although we have to be much more proactive because we're marinating in this sea of chemicals and toxins, because the food is not as nutritious as it used to be, because of the stresses of high-tech living and on. But when you look at what you eat, drink, think, and do, and you slowly but methodically make better and better choices about those four categories, you're on your way to high-level health, high-level wellness. That's what Don Ardell used to call it. And I want us to get past the midpoint. Most doctors treat disease. And if the symptom of the disease goes away, the doctor is grateful for that progress, but then says to the person, well, that's the best I can do. We don't have any more symptoms, but you're not feeling so well, but neither am I. I believe in primary, proactive, predictive, personalized prevention. I want to know years to decades ahead what risk I have, and then I want to reduce that risk. And then I want to come back every 3 to 6 months and recheck these biomarkers to make sure that I'm staying young, that I'm staying as young in the laboratory as I feel and function in the individual. So I know there are people who say, I don't want to do any tests, I just want to go by how I feel. Okay. But I think today you need to be guided by functional, predictive biomarker tests, interpreted to their best outcome goal value. Don't make yourself a statistic. Don't just look at the usual normal range for the laboratory, because that's a statistical phenomenon and actually not very useful in understanding what the person needs to do. So when we define these 8 predictive biomarker tests, we also define the best outcome goal value for each one and a lifestyle program to get people to their goal value or celebrate if they're there. So if you're at your goal value, you have a 99+% chance of living 10 years. And if, on the other hand, you're at the other end of that test spectrum, you might have a less than 10% chance of living a decade. So these are personal and predictive. And the best news of all is we can influence them by what we eat, drink, think, and do, including smart supplementation. And by smart supplementation, I mean full disclosure labels. I mean that everything that's in every product should be on the label. No proprietary blends, no other ingredients, because that's often where toxins and allergens hide in supplements. So at every level, we have to be vigilant. At every level, we have to ask what is on the label. And if there's any words on the label that you don't understand or that reflect other, which means I'm not going to tell you what's there, just don't use those products. The better quality companies want you to know everything that's in the product. Full disclosure labels, and every word is a word that you can understand, because it comes from nature. What we have found is that research studies are usually done on high purity natural products, and they're favorable. But then in commerce, companies bring out what they call a work-alike. So this is a synthetic form of the nutrient. Synthetic vitamin C, for example, is half D and half L. Well, L-ascorbate is nature's ascorbate, gets into the body, helps you. D-ascorbate doesn't get into you, irritates the gut. And many people, when I first talk about ascorbate, they say, oh, I tried vitamin C, it irritates, I have a delicate stomach, it irritates me. Well, that's because they were taking the synthetic work-alike that, in my opinion, doesn't work and might actually carry with it some risk. And, for example, in the vitamin C example I was giving, since half doesn't get into you, the cost of the vitamin C that does get into you just doubled, because the D-ascorbate, which is half of the synthetic material, stays in your gut, builds up in your gut, irritates your gut. Fortunately, your body keeps it out because it's an anti-nutrient. So the work-alikes, even in the supplements, may not be nature's solution, and I favor nature, nurture, and wholeness, and I therefore favor the supplement companies that are full disclosure and that only use the form shown beneficial in a clinical outcome study. That, to me, is scientific, as well as the right decision. Now, it's harder to work with those natural products. They are more expensive. So there will be a small premium that the consumer will pay. But I think the reassurance of knowing everything that's in the product and knowing that everything is active is worth a small quality control premium.
And what is the plant material that they make the vitamin C from, the ascorbate?
Well, almost all ascorbate comes from corn. However, you can get triple recrystallized ascorbate with no corn antigen remaining, and it's 99.99% L-ascorbate. And if you do that correctly, you can end up with a balance of potassium, calcium, magnesium, and zinc minerals that buffer the L-ascorbate, making a tasty, effervescent drink. However, there's a small amount made from potato. At times, sago palm has been a source for ascorbate. And it was a very popular form at one time, but no one is commercially making it that I know of. Sugar beets used to be a source. That stopped about 20 years ago. So almost all the vitamin C is synthetic, derived from corn, and I wouldn't take it. But L-ascorbate, fully buffered, fully reduced, is what I recommend for the C-cleanse, for daily ascorbate supplementation, and to do all the many good things that ascorbate does as the maternal antioxidant that sacrifices herself, that all the other ones, the taurine and alpha-lipoic acid and FAD and glutathione and tocopherol and selenomethionine, these are all regenerated and protected by ascorbate and only ascorbate. So ascorbate is an essential molecule of life. It is, Albert Szent-Györgyi actually said that ascorbate is akin to sunlight and water in importance in life. So ascorbate, from Albert Szent-Györgyi's point of view, he is the guy who isolated ascorbate from Hungarian paprika. He used to tell the story that he was the only Hungarian who didn't like chicken paprikash, and he thought if he took all the paprika out of the garden, his wife couldn't cook with it. Now, that's the anecdote, but the truth is he was smart enough to know that when paprika dries, it stays bright red. Therefore, there must be a reducing substance because the air, the oxygen, didn't turn it brown. And that led to, in the 1930s, the isolation of ascorbate and then polyphenolics. Because it turns out you need these flavonoids and flavanols like quercetin dihydrate and OPC to extend the benefits of the vitamin C, of the ascorbate, especially in the metabolically active cells, the innate immune cells. There are cells in the immune system that wiggle all over the body looking for things to repair. And by the way, no part of you or me is more than 10 years old, and that's in our bones. Blood vessels, maybe 7 years. Large joints, 5 years. So this notion, I'm getting old, is technically incorrect. No part of you is more than 10 years old, and that's your bones. And you can maintain healthy bones simply by moving around enough to stimulate the bone building cells, the osteoblastic cells, as well as the bone remodeling cells, the osteoclastic cells, that turn out to depend on ascorbate. They depend upon sulfur sources. They depend upon magnesium. They depend upon other nutrients. We've just focused on these for right now. But it is possible through choices of daily, consumption and elimination to know where you are and to be getting better and better in every day, in every way. Now, Nature Cure, there's the Nature Cure Encyclopedia. In America at the turn of the last century, I mean 1900, not 2000, but in the early days of the 20th century, shall I say, there were as many eclectic and nature cure physicians as there were AMA, MD, medical doctors like me. Today, we have a few naturopaths in the United States. You have some well-trained herbalists in the United Kingdom. But there are very few compared to the conventionally trained, what I would call allopathic, MD, DO, osteopathic, allopathic physicians. And in that curriculum, there's almost no place for what we're talking about. Now, I come from that world, and I'm publishing in that world about predictive biomarkers and how important they are and their goal values, including the lifestyle plans that the health coach implements. I hope that this has been a message of hope. My intention is to encourage people to come into this reality, the reality that we are marinating in the toxins, but we can do a lot. 80% of the toxins people have inside them are short-lived. That means if you reduce what's coming in, you can reduce by maybe 80% the toxins you're exposed to. And then your body has antitoxin mechanisms if you keep those mechanisms robust. And you keep those mechanisms robust by doing what we're talking about.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. If I could just ask you, algae, spirulina and chlorella and so on.
Yeah, yes.
How do you? There's one part of me. I mean, I have to admit, I'm taking quite a few algae at the moment and feeling rather good on it. There's one part of me that goes, well, hang on, this isn't 100% natural. We're humans. Should we be eating algae? But I hear very convincing stories. Well, what's your experience about their ability of taking the heavy metals out?
Yes. Very specifically, these algae became popular, if I remember correctly, in the early to mid 80s on the basis that they took the toxic metals. They helped remove toxic metals. The truth is the following. Algae are not digestible by the human GI tract. So you have to fracture the little cell, the cell wall, to get the juice that's inside the cell, which is what is healthy. However, nature packages that juice inside the shell to protect those delicate elements from air, oxidation, and damage. So if you have an algae that is freeze fractured, so instead of using heat, they use cold to open the algae shell membrane, I would recommend that you have a freeze-dried and freeze-fractured source. The companies that do that will want you to know it because it's more effort and resource intensive. It costs a little bit more, but it does give you a better quality supplement. So algae are very helpful. However, they're very delicate, and if you don't open them, they just pass through you. And once you do open them, you have to protect them, like with ascorbate or other antioxidants, because oxygen in the air, oxygen in the blood, does oxidize. It does its job. The battery that we look to, which is where the detoxification occurs, it's called the mitochondria. The very place where we're extracting energy from electrons is the place where the toxin has to be detoxified. It's one of the places. There's three phases to detoxification, to be technical for a moment. But one of them is right there in the battery. And what happens when you start bioaccumulating these toxins? It sludges up the cytochromes. It sludges up the very place where the energy is made in the battery of the cell. And that leads to chronic fatigue. That leads to hospitality to chronic viral illness. That leads to inflammatory repair deficits. That leads to self-attack autoimmunity. None of those do you want. Not one of those do you want. And yet those have become, they used to be very rare, but they have become truly epidemic. Inflammatory conditions, autoimmune conditions are a choice. They are a choice. And we know what to do, but we have to rethink the assumption that problems need prescriptions. Very often a problem of living needs a change of habit more than it needs a symptom-reactive, symptom-suppressive prescription. In my own case, I think this is true. Other than for thyroid, desiccated thyroid prescriptions, I haven't written a prescription for a pharmaceutical in decades because there were safer, effective, available solutions that worked. If I needed, I would write a prescription. But in most cases, the doctor defaults to what they know, which is the prescription, the symptom suppressive therapy, because the doctor themselves doesn't know what we're talking about. And hopefully colleagues will be listening and eager to go further. If you're on the academic side, I'm on academia.edu. Dozens of articles you can download for free there. You're welcome to any of our websites. It really is a pleasure to have a conversation with you, Clive, because I can tell that you, too, have made this transition. And most of us got here having made a few mistakes, having been, quote, very human, and therefore suffered a bit. There is a philosophy that says nature offers to nurture you, but if you refuse nature's nurturing, nature will bring you to suffering in order to get you to wake up. There was a man named Milton Ward who wrote a little book called The Brilliant Function of Pain. And he was a student of Ramamurti Mishra, one of my teachers, a guy who wrote the textbook of yoga psychology, commentary on Patanjali Sutras. And he was one of the people who I went to, who taught me an enormous amount, and then gave me the privilege of being my patient. So I think that we can choose to live well and survive the 21st century, but we do have to go beyond the one bug, one drug, the magic bullet mentality. And we also have to therefore find health professionals who are knowledgeable. That's why I think the health coach is so important. It's why we include a detailed interpretation for each individual with the results from our laboratory, so that the individual can look and know what to do, but if they have the help of a professional to coach them, I think that's even better.
Well, absolutely. It seems that there is malnutrition going on more or less globally. That's a medically recognised problem, and that the prescription the doctor should be writing is biodynamic food. And
100%. As I mentioned, we have a permaculture biodynamic food forest in our front yard to show that even in a nice part of Virginia, you can live this way. Rudolf Steiner, who was the source for anthroposophic medicine, Waldorf education, and biodynamic farming, who built off of Goethe, a tradition of experiential and observational science, not the reductionist mistake that Descartes, going back to Newton, made. But yes, a transition from agribusiness to agriculture. And there's a book called Culture and Horticulture by Ehrenreid Pfeiffer, one of Steiner's students, who shows you dramatically. Now, this is a classic book, and today it could be redone with much more elegant pictures and a much more precise science. But it's worth reading because he points out that if you have a healthy soil and healthy water and air, you will have a healthy society. And if you default to letting toxins build up in the soil, water, and air, you will eventually have a collapse of society because the burden of sickness becomes too great. And as Uwe Reinhardt, the Princeton economist, says, look forward a generation and everyone will be in a hospital bed taking care of the person next to them and no one will be paying taxes. Clearly, that's not sustainable. Clearly, that's not the future we want for ourselves or for others. On another occasion, we could talk about how this worked in my own life, in my parents' life, in my children's lives, because sometimes the anecdote, the personal story, helps illustrate the big principle. And we can talk about the big principles because nature, nurture, and wholeness is a pretty good place to start. But more importantly, I welcome people into the land of being healthy by choice for now and for a lifetime. Because we can mostly live well and long. However, it means intensive supplementation. It means eating half, walking twice, forgiving thrice, and loving unconditionally. And another kind of summary. Too many people spend their health to gain wealth. Then they use up their wealth to regain their health. And they learn to live in the past or the future so that when their time is done, they've not really had meaningful moments. And that was said by my daughter's godfather, the Dalai Lama, and I agree with him that kindness and compassion are the basis for spiritual life. In fact, he says his religion is kindness and compassion. And I invite everybody to join the religion of kindness and compassion, whatever other spiritual practice or path you may be on. Being kind to yourself and others, being compassionate, being engaged but non-attached. It's a paradox, but so is life.
Well, I agree completely, and I think one could add to that to have gratitude in each moment.
Mm. Gratitude is the right word too, Clive. As I have become more myself, which means I slow down to the point where I experience the moments as they occur. I am so grateful for little things. It's spring here in Virginia, and there are tiny little white and purple flowers that come up first, even before the forsythia, even before the early blooming. I'm just enchanted by what nature provides. In our permaculture biodynamic food forest that my son created 6 years ago, he tells me that a new flower opens every day of the season because different pollinators need different times of the year. And my role is to sit in the garden and watch the pollinators and watch the little critters, and then maybe pick something and bring it in and have it at the table for dinner. So I'm not the gardener, but I'm grateful for the gardener. And I agree with you that we need to reclaim soil, water, and air as common rights. That is, as human beings, we should be able to breathe the air without, as in too many cities, the equivalent of smoking a pack or two of cigarettes a day. If you're in Beijing or Shanghai, if you're in Bangkok or New York City, just walking around, or Los Angeles, major metropolitan areas, often built on air inversions. Why? I don't know why we build multi-million people cities in the desert, etc. I know people who have chosen, as I have, to live in nature, to live surrounded by nature. Why? Because it's a great show. I do it because I'm grateful to nature for all that she offers us, and I find that it is possible to balance out the challenges and stresses of high-tech living with a 21st century humane, functional, engaged but non-attached, personal, and monitored plan to thrive. I think it's Arianna Huffington who has an organization about living well, and I think they call it Thrive. And she points out that restorative sleep is really important. Eating less and being more active, just walking for 45 minutes a day is a very healthy thing to do. Sitting is the new smoking. If you just get up from your desk 5 minutes out of each hour, or if when you're talking on the cell phone, you walk at the same time rather than sit, you help many things in your body. And now with these biometric devices, my phone knows how many steps I take when it's with me. And it often reminds me, that I haven't gotten my 10,000 steps in yet today. So I take a little walk in the evening. Or I walk in circles in the house if it's cold. Or I go outside and I just amble. I used to walk quickly. There's purposeful walking, but I recommend ambling. Just amble about and discover a blade of grass, or discover dew in the morning, or discover a little flower that you didn't know was there. So gratitude that comes from living joyfully in the moment by nurturing ourselves. If I wasn't willing to invest in my kitchen, in my bedroom, in my living space, I would, like most people my age, be taking handfuls of medications. Now, I take handfuls of supplements, and I do live the way we're talking about. But I'm glad to tell you that the average person my age is taking 6 to 8 prescription medicines. And not only am I not taking any prescription medicines, my dad at 90 was not taking any prescription medicines. And it wasn't because I prevented him. It was because he felt so well taking the supplements, eating moderately, being physically active, being grateful for his lot in life. And it was not an easy lot, but he was grateful for it. So I'm glad you brought up the gratitude piece. I do think it's important for us to quiet ourselves enough that gratitude spontaneously comes up into our lives. Our life is more worth living when we're grateful for what happens. And I mean all of it. I've had a near-death experience, and I can tell you, it's another conversation perhaps for another time, but I can tell you that on the one hand, I believe I've come as close to death as you can and then come back, and I've been intensively scanned since then because of the experience. But what I wanted to say is that even in that moment where it seemed like my life was hanging by a thread, literally and figuratively, it was all right. If I lived, it was all right. And if I passed on, it was all right. It was all right. Now, it's easy to hear those words. It's when you experience it that it becomes meaningful. But I will share that it was my experience. And it's been the experience of many. I've read others who have had similar experiences. It actually might make an interesting conversation at some point in time, because many people, I believe, many people do not take care of themselves because they misunderstand. They don't believe that they can save their life by habits of daily living. They believe that they need prescriptions to solve their health problems. And I think people should wake up from that. Magic bullets can be magic. They can save your life. That's terrific. But it's what you eat, drink, think, and do that determines the quality of 92% of your life. 8% is genetic, but 92% is a pretty big piece that we can influence. And be grateful for the fact that we can influence it, and influence it for the better or the worser. It's our choice. And I know that most people choose by default. They are afraid, or they don't know, or they don't have access. But it's people like yourself that bring the message, and people like me who have the privilege of both coming as a skeptic, because as I said in the beginning, and I want to say at the end, I didn't learn about this at Boston University Medical School. I didn't learn about this much at the National Institutes of Health. In fact, when I talked about evoking healing responses in human beings, I taught at the university at NIH. It was the first time that any of the faculty at the National Institutes of Health University had taught about human healing responses. Well, it's about time that we open up that book, because in wisdom traditions all over the world, in scientific paths that are built off of, as you correctly said, the biodynamic approach, say, to agriculture, they make possible a garden, almost a Garden of Eden on Earth. We still could renew the planet, but we have to start with an intoxicated soil, water, and air, and slowly rehabilitate that. The good news is that nature has every capacity to restore itself. We have to stop intoxicating ourselves and the world around us. That, from my point of view, is the biggest challenge. It is very profitable to go from cradle to grave and leave toxins behind. And I want a society that's cradle to cradle, leaving nothing behind.
Well, quite. And I think, it's educating the children at this point, because a lot of children now believe that mobility scooters and, Alzheimer's are normal and natural. They've got no idea. They think that this few trees and this few birds is normal and natural. And when I was young, if I drove up to London from where I live, you had to stop after about 3/4 of an hour to wash all the dead insects off your windscreen. It was Armageddon on the windscreen, and now you're lucky here in England to have one dead insect on your windscreen, and people haven't noticed. If 99% of the insects had gone, you'd think maybe people would wake up.
Well, there are some excellent documentaries, including one by David Attenborough, on the bees as pollinators. And to quote Albert Einstein, if the bees disappear, the planet will disappear in 3 years. So it's absolutely essential. Those little bugs are not there to be pests. They have a function. And we need to nurture nature and then get the benefits back from that, rather than what we've been doing, which is dumping stuff wherever, taking off the tops of mountains and leaving behind pools that slowly leach down into the aquifers, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, part of my work is as an environmental toxicologist, and so I'm fairly aware of the things that terrify people. But as you hear, I believe there are solutions to each and every one of these challenges, and that we can rise to the opportunity and save our lives. And not only save our lives, but rehabilitate the area that we have. It's Rene Dubos used to say, think globally, but act locally. I can tell you that the soil here has always been
never been chemically contaminated, but it gets better and better each year. And the plants are so healthy that if a beetle, like a Japanese beetle, comes by and lands on the leaf, the beetle takes one bite and flies away because the plant puts protective chemicals that the beetle doesn't like. And what the anthroposophic and biodynamic farmers and philosophers say is that the pests come when we have weakened the plant. And they're just an indication that we need to enrich the soil or the way in which we're taking care of the plant. And my friend Paul Keene, who started Walnut Acres, had this magnificent photograph. His biodynamic wheat standing proud. And there were 2 organic farmers on the east side and 2 conventional farmers on the west side. And the weevils had come through. The boll weevils had come through. And they ate the organic wheat to the ground. They ate the commercial wheat to the ground. They left the biodynamic wheat standing tall. That's an example of how we can live in harmony with nature, but we have to give up some of our cherished illusions, such as cradle to grave, that we can leave behind toxic matter for other people to clean up, whether it be toxic metals or hormone disruptors or solvent residues or radioisotopes or mold products. And they all turn out to be oxidative stressors. They all use up protective antioxidants, buffering minerals, and essential cofactors. And that's why in the 21st century, you need to be careful about what you consume, but you also need to be proactive about supplements and safer, more effective supplements that use the forms shown beneficial in clinical outcome studies.
Well, thank you so much. I'm aware that I've run you way over time, and I very, very much look forward to speaking to you again, because I too have had a near-death experience.
Oh.
And my youngest daughter is a Steiner Waldorf child, and
oh, wonderful. We have much to talk about another time, but yes, thank you for this, and let's stay in conversation, and hopefully we'll be back to compare notes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Be well.